Okay, so hi, I'm Anne Jamison and I'm a lecturer in literary studies in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts. And my main field of research is 19th century British, Irish and more recently Australian writing. And I have a particular interest in women's writing and feminist approaches to literature and culture. So why do we get published? Well, we get published because we get excited about our research. We think we have ideas that actually can change our discipline. They can change practice in our discipline. They can change ways of thinking about our discipline. And we feel that we've actually got a really important contribution to make. And we want to disseminate our ideas beyond the confines of our thesis and of the people that we might talk to within our own institutions. We also publish because increasingly it's really important to publish. If you're starting out as an early career researcher, you want to start building up that track record of publications. And why do we want to do that? Well, we want to do that because it's important in terms of getting an academic job, of progressing in our academic careers. It's really important in terms of promotion, and in some ways it's a sign of prestige within our own discipline. So we want to put our materials out there. We're making a contribution to our discipline, which is really exciting about our own research, and we're passionate about that. But there's also that pragmatic approach to publishing as well. We've got to do it. We've got to do it to build up our profiles, and that's increasingly important. I think it's never too early to start thinking about publishing. I think that it's good to talk to your supervisor. It's good to get experience of going to conferences, getting feedback on your research, and you start to get a sense of the ideas that you're working on, how important they are, how they're beginning to circulate within wider discourses, and you begin to have a sense that actually this idea could work. It could work as a publication, it could work as a book chapter, it could work as a journal article, but the process of publication is quite a long one, so it's good to start thinking about it early. It's good to also start planning it, and even as you're writing your thesis, to begin to think about those ideas that actually you can remove from the apparatus of your thesis and that will still work as standalone pieces of research. There are so many academic journals out there, so which one do you pick? Which one is going to be best suited for your research? And I guess there's a couple of things you've got to think about. One is context and one is audience. So for the first time you might actually be writing for an audience that is not your supervisor, so you have to again think about how your research idea and how the thing that you want to write is going to tap into a particular audience. What journals are there out there that seem to suit or match the type of research that you want to disseminate and that you actually want to publish? There are ways of going about choosing a journal. Some of them are very practical. Some of them involve simply talking to your peers, talking to your supervisor. They will often be able to give you a sense of some of the really leading journals in your field. If you're working on something very niche, they also might be able to help you navigate that kind of field of journals, that broad feed of journals, and be able to kind of narrow it down a little bit. Certain types of research will only suit certain types of journals. But we're also really lucky that we have these great kind of journal finders. We have these online tools and databases that will also help us to think about the impact and the reach of our research once we publish it. And of course we want our impact and reach to be high. So we want to be publishing with high quality journals, but journals also have that reach, they have that impact. So for example, we can use tools and we can use databases now, we can plug in journal titles and we get back a whole series of information about where that journal is published, how it's distributed. If we publish with that journal, what is the likelihood that we will be cited by other academics? And we need to think about that impact, reach, quality. It's really important. And some of the terms that we use are quite interchangeable. So we talk about peer review and scholarly review. And sometimes it can be quite confusing, I think, as an early career researcher or a kind of postgraduate student trying to navigate that field and thinking, well, what does it mean to be a high quality journal? What does it mean to be scholarly or peer reviewed? And again, the great thing about these databases, the great things about these journal finders is they give you exactly that information, how your journal is recognized in terms of how your institution recognises it, how the government recognises it when it assesses our research. So on the one hand, we talk to peers, we talk to supervisors, we think about the places that our research is best suited, and then we try to think about that smaller category of journals that we've already come up with, and we begin to plug them into those tool finders, those journal finders, and they can give us more specific information about quality and about impact and about reach. If your research isn't going to have any impact, then it kind of loses the value of publishing it in the first place. Expectations in terms of publishing. One thing to think about is timeframes. Timeframes can actually be a lot longer, I think, than some people suspect. Now, this can depend on discipline. By the time you've sat down there and you've done your research on your journals and you've found somewhere that you want to try to target for publication and you've written your article and you're ready to send it off, again, certain types of databases, the journal finder, for example, will give you information about submissions. So it will give you instructions for authors, it's usually called, and it will tell you about the submission process. It will tell you how to submit, who to submit to, and it would also tell you the format that they're looking for in terms of style, so how they want to see your piece of research or your piece of writing presented before you even begin to send it off. So once you find out where you're supposed to send it and how you're supposed to send it off, you do that. It's usually via email, and you will get some kind of a response, some kind of acknowledgement that it has been received. Usually in a high quality journal, it then goes out to specialists in the field. So your paper will be read by 2, possibly 3 specialists, and they will write a kind of report for the editors or the editorial committee of the journal that you have submitted to. And on the basis of those reports, the editors will decide to either invite you to actually go ahead with the submission. It may require revisions, and that's something you've got to expect. It's very rare, in fact, that a journal will accept something outright as it is, and often there are minor, sometimes major revisions that you might have to make to your paper. So you've got to navigate some of the reader reports. And the time frame, even when you do get accepted, can be very long in some disciplines. If I try to think of an example of my own work, there are things that from the point of submission to publication has been 2.5 years. So there are long time frames, and you need to think about how long it might take for something to come out, because in terms of the datedness of the research, you might actually need it to come out quite quickly. And again, things like Journal Finder, the information that they hold on journals can actually tell you some of that stuff. I guess one of the things you have to expect as well is rejection. It's great when you get accepted, but you may also have to expect that you won't get accepted as well. So you have to think about how you deal with that type of rejection and what you do with that and how you move on at that particular point. So it's a huge achievement, and I think you should feel really proud actually that you got published. And yes, there are ways that you can capitalize on it. Increasingly, there's a lot of self-promotion that I think some academics feel a little bit uncomfortable with, but that actually is increasingly important. So you can set yourself up with online profiles like Google Scholar, academia.edu, where we're actually uploading a lot of our materials, often pre-publication actually now in a kind of draft form. And what this does is it boosts where your research goes. It can boost your citation metrics. It can simply boost the value in some ways and the impact of what you're publishing. So it's important to have those profiles, that when you do get something accepted for publication, that you actually upload either a draft or the final version if copyright allows, and that you upload it into those particular places. I think it's important that you don't just sit back actually once you get something published, but that yes, you do capitalize on that. And I guess it's always good to be self-reflexive. What went really well? You know, what worked about this? Was it simply that your research was really great, or was it that actually you'd worked really hard to research the journal, to find and to write something that really fit with that particular journal? Were there things that actually came back in the feedback that, even though you got accepted, actually helped you to really refine your research? Are there new ideas that came out of your publication? So we celebrate our publications. I think it's a great achievement, but we've got to build on them. We've got to self-promote, and we've also got to look at through the whole experience that we went through in terms of writing it, submitting it, and getting it accepted, and seeing what we can learn from that process for the next time around. Okay, some of the top things always do your research, I think, is really important. And it's not just in terms of the content, so you do your research in terms of actually writing up your paper, but do your research in terms of the journals that you really want to get into. Again, you're now talking to an audience that is more than just your supervisor. What is it that this journal seems to publish? Look at past issues. What have they published in recent years? Is there a pattern to some of the things that they publish? And does your research fit with that journal? Simply cold calling, I think, on a whole bunch of journals is never a particularly good idea, and certainly sending out multiple submissions is a really bad idea. So do your research. Do your research on the process of submitting, but also do your research on where you're targeting. The other thing is rejection. Rejection's really hard to take sometimes, but be positive about that too. Be positive about some of the constructive criticism. You often will be sent the reader reports, and sometimes rejection is just as important as acceptance. I look at my own kind of publishing career and I think about some of the things that have been rejected, and I think about some of the really harsh criticisms and the awful things that were said about my research and why it wasn't going to be accepted. But actually within that, I think there were really important nuggets of knowledge for me in terms of, again, being self-reflexive, in terms of thinking, okay, that didn't work, but I can actually take quite a lot out of that. I can take the constructive criticism that was given to me, and I think some of the hardest hitting and most cutting edge pieces of research that I've published were actually things that originally got rejected. So never be dejected about the rejection, but think about it in a kind of really positive, light. And I suppose the final thing I would think that is quite important is when you actually start to be quite successful in terms of your publishing, to try to maintain some consistency with that. It's really hard as a researcher. We're always kind of trying to balance quantity with quality, and you will find that those two things often rub up against each other. They aren't always very compatible, but it is really important to be consistent, that once you kind of get something accepted, you learn from that experience, you figure out what went really well, how do I be consistent, how do I keep that ball rolling, and how do I move on an upward trajectory? Maybe you didn't get into the leading journal in your field. How can you move towards getting into that journal so that you start having some of those really top successes in your publishing career?